I can tell you a few police stories at some point, but...
What do you mean at some point?
Well, not today, but...
What?
What are you saving it for?
Okay. So, the day I got accepted to law school, to the Gonzaga School of Law, which is at the Gonzaga University in Spokane, Washington, I got my letter of acceptance.
Yeah.
And, came in the mail. I opened it. I called several friends right away, close friends, Calvin, and one of my closest friends at that time, Manny Bogle, and John Bickham, who wound up being a legend in seismic, working seismic for many, many years. And lots of people who didn't, we moved in different circles, knew of John. So there, and Glenn Tallis. So there was the four of us, and they said, well, we should do something. We should celebrate. So, okay. So I went and I rented a room at what was then called the Majestic Inn on McLeod Trail.
Yep.
And I had just bought, and you have to remember, so this is 1980. There was no such thing as indoor weed or weed stores or anything. Marijuana was smuggled in from all over the world. It was outdoor grown. It was incredibly powerful weed. You can't duplicate the outdoor conditions from Thailand or from Northern California or from the Kootenays. If you ever watch it, there was a 60 Minutes many years ago about these growers in Northern California. And Washington, most of them were ex-Vietnam veterans. They slept on their little plot with guns and guard dogs. That's how valuable this was. $300 for 1 ounce of weed.
Really?
If you equate that to today's dollars?
Yep.
Well, what's $1 in 1980 to $1 in 2024?
I'm not sure.
Probably 8 times. Money doubles.
I'm going to say
every
at
8
least
years.
three. I'm going to say at least 3 times.
So you're talking about $1,000 a bag,
right
today,
right.
And we got some booze, and then a fifth friend came over, Anil Krishna. So there's the 5 of us in the hotel room, and of course we're smoking joints, we're drinking, and we're playing cards.
Yep.
There's about $1,000 in cash on the table.
Yep.
Okay, I'm working for the city as on the paving crew. All of a sudden, there's 2 raps on the door, and I go, who is? And before I could even get it out, the door opens. It's the hotel manager and 2 policemen, a sergeant and a constable. And I've got my letter of acceptance folded in my back pocket. The ounce of weed is sitting on the TV straight up like this. And you would have to go like this to clear the weed smoke out of the room. There's $1,000. And Anil had called an escort, and she's naked on the bed, in the bedroom. This is no shit. They come in, I go, what? And they said, who rented this room? And I said, I did. You used a stolen credit card. It was a Visa card that my mom had given me 3 years earlier when I was taking my Bachelor of Science. I guess she'd forgotten she'd given it to me. She had lost hers and reported it lost and had been issued a new one.
Wow.
And forgot I ever had another card of the same number. So in they come, and this constable was like 6'3", some Swedish-looking guy, and then the sergeant. And he wanted to arrest everybody. There's the weed, the escort. He goes and the sergeant goes and get dressed, get out of here where you paid, yeah. There's $1,000 of chips on the table.
Underground gambling.
Yeah, it's just unbelievable. Everything and booze, everything you can think of. And so, well, I rented the room. So he said, and we were pretty normal looking.
Right.
So he told the constable, who was he wanted to put everybody in handcuffs right there. He says, look, you take these 4 guys down to downstairs. You check if there's any outstanding warrants. And if there's not, you just let them go home. Okay? So he shuts the door and he says, well, this is quite a situation. And I said, listen, I had no idea this it's my mom. And I pulled the credit card out and there's my mom's name on it. And I pulled out my driver's license, my name. Anyway, he says, okay, listen, I need to verify your story. I'm going to call your mom. So I was more worried about what my mom was going to say than anything this cop was going to do. So he's sitting on one bed, I'm sitting on another, and there was a bedroom to this room too. And he starts dialing my number. I told him the phone number. And 403-255-7900. As he gets to like the 9, I put my finger, what are you going to tell her? What are you going to tell her? And he says, listen, so he starts dialing again. I did the same thing. He says, listen, I will handcuff you to allow me to dial your mother. You're just going to have to trust me. So he dials her. So it's about 7:30. And on a Thursday night, I worked a 4-day work week, so Monday through Thursday. So, I was able to, I could have stayed up all night for.
Yeah.
And he was real, didn't say anything about, said, is this Mrs. Saltman? Yes, Mrs. Saltman, I have your son here. He rented a room at the Majestic Inn. Yes, I'm familiar with where that is. But he used your credit card, and when the hotel took it, and then ultimately it came back, because there weren't computers or anything. It took a couple hours, that this card is stolen or lost.
Yeah.
Oh, she says, I'd given him that card for emergency purposes a number of years ago. When I lost mine, I didn't even think or remember that I had given him a second one.
Yeah.
So my story confirmed. So he said, thank you, Mrs. Altman, and hung up the phone. So now I'm sitting there. I now pulled out my letter of acceptance to Gonzaga. And I said, would you read this? And he reads it and he says, folds it up. He says, well, this is really a situation, isn't it? And he was the greatest guy. So he's a sergeant. He said, I'm going to tell you what. Not worried about the escort. She wasn't with you, but your friend had paid her, so there's no issue there. She's gone. The constable's downstairs, and he radioed down, none of your friends had any warrants. They're all on their way home. Sorry to have broken up your party. And then he said, as for that marijuana, back then you went to jail in 1980.
For possession.
Oh, absolutely. I had friends that up till, well, a good friend of mine, Brent Nolan, who was a geostatistician, one of the most famous geostatisticians in North America. So he was a geologist, and then he specialized in geostatistics when computers first came out. And he worked for ESO, and they used to send him to the United States, to Houston, 3 or 4 times a year to lecture, because ESO had, they were affiliated with Chevron back then, huge offices in...
I always thought ESO was Imperial Oil.
Well, it is.
Is it?
Imperial Oil,
okay.
But they were affiliated with Chevron. And he was well known. So he had other oil companies would call Imperial Oil or Esso and say, would he be available to give us... So he was all over the United States. He had got arrested with a hash pipe in Zeller's at the lunch counter. He got into the bathroom when he was 16. So now we're talking 53. And never had a problem going into the U.S. It's random. One time they punched him up, barred him from going into the U.S. for that conviction when he was 16.
When you said 53, do you mean 1953?
No, I mean when he was 53 years old.
Oh, they banned him from going to the United States when he was when he was 50 years old. Through,
so he had to go back to Imperial Oil. Well, I can't go.
So can he theoretically to this day, or
people in Canada are mistaken if they think a pardon, which he had from the Canadian government, is worth anything. You need a waiver from the United States.
Right.
So I ultimately dealt with the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs in Canada. Took me 3 years to get this. It's not a legal process. It's a foreign policy process. So I didn't start with the deputy minister, but it kept going up. And I had letters from the president of SO Canada, et cetera, sent them all. And he dealt with the secretary, the underlings to the Secretary of State in the United States. And he got a waiver issued by the U.S. government. And that's what it's called. It's a waiver. So if I'm coming from Canada with a Canadian government pardon, the U.S. doesn't give a shit. If I'm coming with a U.S. waiver, I'm Canadian and I'm going through U.S. customs to go into the U.S. and I have a waiver, there's no issue. So at 56, he was able to go back in.
I had a friend that worked for customs in the early 2000s in Canada, and he was telling me he'd got so many Americans coming up with, a shoplifting charge from 30 years ago or, a DUI from 22 years ago.
Would he deny them entry?
And he said, he felt kind of stupid doing it because a lot of these guys in their 50s and 60s and they're professionals. And he just said it's Canadian law. They I believe most criminal charges, they won't let a foreigner enter the country.
Well, it depends now. But okay, let me finish so the sergeant said, listen, how much was that? And I told him $300. It was $280 for the ounce. He says, listen, if I hear the toilet flush, I'm going to assume that's gone. And so I actually, I didn't really pay attention other than hear the toilet flush. I dumped the whole thing into the toilet and flushed it. I come walking out. He says, okay, did you put that down your sock or down your pants? Or I said, no, I flushed it down the toilet. He said, I hope you're going to be a smarter lawyer than you are listener, because I told you if I hear the toilet flush, I'm going to assume the weed is gone. Anyway, I wound up taking him a bottle of Crown Royal on the Monday, and I ultimately wound up doing a divorce for him.
You're kidding.
No, about 12 years later, we kept in touch. He was in District 6, which was my home district, which is right behind the co-op there.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was a really good guy.